So welcome everyone to Jonathan Katz Talks about his new book, I'm going to screw up the title because I don't have it in front of me.
The
The
daring,
Life of Eve Adams.
the daring life.
The Daring Life and Dangerous Times of
Right,
Eve Adams. There we go. Thank
right.
you so much for joining us. Thank you to all who donated to the Bureau. We very much appreciate that, and to all who purchased the book. My name is Greg Newton. I am the co-founder of the Bureau of General Services Queer Division with my partner, Donnie Jokum. And the Bureau, as you may know, has been closed along with the center since this charming pandemic began over a year ago. But we are hoping to be able to open, I'm hoping July. I think maybe September is more realistic, but we'll make a lot of online noise as soon as we know, as soon as we get word from the center that we can reopen. We'll be shouting from the mountaintops, you can be sure. But in the meantime, we've been doing online events, virtual events like this, which is lovely because it's allowed people from close and far to join us. So that's been one silver lining of this moment. It also pushed us to finally launch an online bookstore. So there are a couple of good things that have come out of this that we're happy about. So I'm going to introduce Jonathan, quickly read his bio, and then we'll just get started with the event. And if you have questions, just hold on to those. You can put them in the chat function if you like, but we're a small enough group that if you would like to unmute yourself and ask a question later in the program, I'll let you know when we're ready for that. So let me pull up your bio. And here we go. Jonathan Ned Katz is the author of 4 pioneering books on the US history of LGBTQ life, sexuality, and intimacy. He is the founder of outhistory.org, and he has taught and spoken at Yale, Harvard, and Princeton. He is also the recipient of the Magnus Hirschfeld Medal for outstanding contributions to sex research and Yale University's Brudner Prize, among many accolades. So please give a warm welcome. Clap your hands very visibly for Jonathan, and let's get started.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm delighted to do this. Thank you, Greg. So I'm going to just do a little brief overview of Eve Adams' life. And then I hope that we'll be able to have a discussion with people out there in the audience. So on November 30th, 1926, at Eve Adams' deportation hearing at the Women's Penitentiary on Welfare Island, now it's Roosevelt Island, Eve responded to the charge that she had published an indecent book. Quote, "I admit having written a book entitled Lesbian Love based on true acts and living today. The object of the book was to show the exact things that are happening from day to day, and every character is a true character, except she is given an assumed name. I believe the book is not in any way immoral, indecent, or vulgar. There is not one word in the whole book that is vulgar. I can't see why I should be singled out and sentenced to imprisonment for writing my book, which was only meant to show the humorous side of life, the serious side of life, and tragic all in one. Born Kavaz Lotchever in 1891 in a Jewish family in Poland, Adams immigrated to the US in 1912. In the US, the 21-year-old, she was young when she got here, befriended and worked with the famous anarchists Emma Goldman and Alexander Berkman, and got to know the larger-than-life Ben Lewis Reitman, who had been and was a love affair of Emma Goldman's life. In New York City, Eve worked in the garment industry in a sweatshop factory and was a member of the Progressive Ladies Waist Makers Union. Those were makers of women's blouses. One of the lesbians profiled in Eve's book, Little Jimmy, may actually be Eve. Little Jimmy works in a ladies' waist shop and goes on a vacation to a hotel started by her union. I figured out it was probably Unity House in Bushkill, Pennsylvania, initiated by radical Jewish women garment workers. These women argued to doubting male comrades that working class solidarity would be enhanced if union members had a country place to dance. Little Jimmy dances with a woman at the resort, and this leads to a romantic sexual encounter. In Eve's book, she talks a lot about gender issues. Eve's narrator says, little did Jimmy know of herself. Little she knew of the masculine spark within her. All she did know was that she felt more comfortable in boyish clothes. She could run better, climb trees better, and feel unhampered in every action. That masculine spark, a male-typed yearning to run, climb, pursue boys' activities, wear boys' clothes, and feel free is a repeated poignant theme of several early narratives of persons born female who rejected restrictive feminine norms. Although Jimmy is the only girl at the hotel enjoying this boyish freedom, no one frowns at her clothes or activity. So she is perfectly at ease, she says, or Eve says about little Jimmy. Elsewhere, it seems Jimmy's clothes and swagger have elicited criticism, as is suggested Eve's did also, and it's documented that Eve's clothes and her short hair elicited criticism. After several years of factory work, Eve got tired of that work, and by 1918, she had probably begun to sell radical periodicals, including the Yiddish humor magazine Der große Kundes, literally the big stick, more expressively the big prankster. Eve had dinner one night with Jacob Marinoff, editor of The Big Prankster. Jacob's sister, the actress Vanya Marinoff, was also at the dinner along with her husband, Carl Van Vechten, who was mostly homosexual, but this marriage lasted for 50 years between Vanya and Carl, and it had ups and downs, but it lasted. Vanya was then starring in a Greenwich Village Theater play advocating free love. Eve was very enchanted by the actress and wrote her a fervid fan letter. Quote, I saw nothing else but your beautiful dark eyes, big eyes, hidden under those long, long lashes. Yet I saw your soul, and it made me shiver and respect you so much more than an ordinary actor. You were not an actress, Miss Marinoff. You were a great artist and may be compared with the world's greatest. Eve started making a living as a touring saleswoman of radical periodicals. Because of her association with left radical causes and famous anarchists, Eve started jailed by the Bureau of Investigation. The young Justice Department employee, John Edgar Hoover, who you've heard of, his career went on for 50 years, I think, initiated much of this surveillance of Eve because of what the Bureau and he called radical activities. That's the term they used that covered Eve's selling radical periodicals. That's what her subversive activities were. Anti-Jewish and bending comments are blatant in reports of Bureau of Investigation agents. A Los Angeles agent commented on Eve's appearance, quote, Jewish type, hair cropped, complexion, that's her skin color, medium. She wasn't quite white enough. Not attractive, he says, wears nose glasses, unquote. A citizen informer, Dr. Charles T. Bayless, walked into the San Francisco Bureau office to inform on Eve. Bayless described Eve to the Justice Department. She has, quote, short, fuzzy red hair, dresses mannishly, and is dirty, greasy, and Jewish in appearance. Bayless was touring the US in 1919, presenting a speech titled, Making a Better America. It sounds familiar, doesn't it? In one talk, Bayless advocated, quote, deport the alien red, put the native-born traitor in jail, strict immigration, desirable persons, and teach Americanism in the public schools. Around 1921 and 1922, Eve settled in Chicago with a beloved woman partner, Ruth Olson Norlander, an artist. They opened a queer-friendly bohemian cafe, the Gray Cottage. They advertised it as Chicago's Greenwich Village Tea Room. And I always liked that idea that it was new to me that Greenwich Village was like signified high bohemia in the early 1920s. They advertised the Gray Cottage as Eve Adams and Ruth Norlander in charge. It says that in an ad. And I think that was a signal, you know, the two women are in charge. That's a queer signal, and, you know, made lesbians and gay men know that these two women were in charge. Poet Kenneth Rexroth recalled the cottage as, quote, much the most bohemian of the bohemian tea rooms of the Chicago North Side. One unhappy visitor to the cottage called it, quote, that refuge of thwarted intellect, whose artistic atmosphere included one soiled menu card and one frowsy-haired proprietress who borrows cigarettes. That was probably Eve. Numerous Chicago newspaper ads for the Gray Cottage referred to Eve's friend Ben Reitman as chairman of weekly talks. One talk was on vice and virtue in the village, a talk by Reitman with hot discussion, as it says in the ad. Another talk was on sensuality in American fiction. In 1925, Eve had split with Norlander in Chicago and came back to New York City. There in Greenwich Village, in the basement of 129 McDougal Street, she opened another queer and bohemian friendly cafe, Eve's Hangout. And you can go to 129 McDougal, to the restaurant La Lanterna, and go out in the basement and look around, and it looks, or it did look, they're fixing it up a little. I hope they don't change much. It has looked exactly like it looked in Eve's time. After Eve got in trouble in New York, the entertainment industry trade paper Variety reported shortly before launching her tea room, Eve, quote, had affected masculine attire and become a regular at the various resorts catering to temperamentals. Those were a term for homosexuals. When Eve, this is a variety going on, when Eve opened her tea room on McDougal Street, she had given the tip off of what kind of joint it was through placarding the main entrance with a sign which read, "Men are admitted, but not welcome." I think that sign probably never existed. It's not mentioned in any of, and its words suspiciously promote the stereotype of lesbians, especially butch lesbians, as man haters. In 1925, Adams risked all to write and publish a book titled Lesbian Love. It briefly pictures about 24 women, amounting to a pioneering lesbian community study. One of the best sections of Eve's book is titled How I Found Myself. In this, an unnamed narrator describes her first sexual experience with a woman at age 19. The first person unnamed narrator suggests that 2 years before Eve embarked for the US, Eve, had experienced a sensual encounter that her narrator recalls as, quote, beautiful and, quote, one of the most significant events of my life. Eve's surveillance by Bureau of Investigation agents and immigration officials led to Eve's arrest. Immigration officials, the New York City police, and a biased informer and a number of state employees were all out to get her. I have documented an actual conspiracy between a judge, parole officials, and immigration officials to deport Eve, to make sure that she got deported. Eve was convicted of publishing a book. She was also convicted of a second charge, attempted sex with the young policewoman sent in to entrap her. Eve denied that anything had happened between them except going to the theater, but it was one testimony against another, and with a biased judge. Adams was jailed for 1.5 years and then deported. Eve lived and worked in France for 13 years, selling what were considered dirty books in English that US and British tourists could not buy in their own countries. Along with Fanny Hill, Eve sold books by James Joyce, Anais Nin, D.H. Lawrence, and Henry Miller, with whom she became friends. He was in Paris at the same time. And there's quite interesting testimony about their friendship. Eve was written up in the New York Tribune, which despite its name was published in Paris in English, in a column by an American journalist with the unusual name of Wombley Bald. Bald Eve, one of the few females who never criticizes another woman, exclamation point. Bald then added, Eve had been, quote, asked to leave America because she wrote a harmless little book called Lesbian Love. Bald concluded with a prophecy, quote, one of these years, America won't act that way, unquote. That brief comment, those extraordinary words, are the single defense of Eve's book published in her lifetime. Bold, brave words accompanied an affectionate caricature of Eve that I reproduce in my book. Eve and her dear, close, live-with companion, Hella, were living in France when the Nazis invaded in 1940. They managed to evade arrest for 3 years, and it took a lot to avoid arrest. The Nazis were more and more terrorizing the population, the Jewish population, the anti-Nazi population, by arresting people. But Hella and Eve were finally arrested and sent to Auschwitz and murdered. Towards the very end of my research on Eve Adams, I think my book was already at the publisher, I was fortunate that Eve's younger brother, Yerakmiel, who had immigrated to Israel and had a son, and that son had a son named Aaron Zahavi, and I was very fortunate to get in contact with Aaron Zahavi. And very late in my research, Aaron tried to find the family of Eve's companion, Hella Olstein. And sure enough, because of internet, what it makes possible, Eve found a lawyer in Switzerland, Daniel Olstein, whose father was Hella's brother. And sure enough, Daniel Olstein turned out to have an amazing, important collection of letters from Hella and Eve. Eve writes little notes on some of the letters, including a new passport photo of Eve that Eve had given to a member of the family, and 2 photos of Eve and Hella together. And having Hella's and Eve's letters to family members allowed me to communicate the tightening grip of the Nazis and these 2 women's desperate hope to escape. But as I said, after evading the Nazis for 3 years, both Hella and Eve were arrested. They were carried from France to Auschwitz in Poland on Nazi Convoy 63. That was a train made up of cattle cars, a trip of about 3 days in a cattle car. So you can imagine what that was like. Not enough food, not enough air. There was one potty in a corner. Sometimes a person died and was sitting there. Children were crying. It was horrible. It was a horrible torture situation, the cattle car. Amazingly, though, 3 survivors of Convoy 63, the very train Eve and Hella were on, survivors also of Auschwitz, wrote memoirs detailing the horror of that Convoy 63 trip. Those descriptions allowed me to convey the Auschwitz itself, because it's my understanding that as the Germans left Auschwitz, they destroyed lots of papers that would have documented what was going on there. So there isn't much documentation of actually what was happening in Auschwitz itself. But so it was very important to find this description, detailed description of the horrifying conditions on this train by 3 different survivors. So in summary, Eve Adams' life links diverse, making her life, I think, directly relevant to present concerns. Her publishing Lesbian Love makes her central to the history of sexuality, in particular lesbian resistance history. Repeated Critical references to Eve's gender bending make her story central to historically changing norms of masculinity and femininity. 3, Eve's story is central to the history of immigration, in particular to Jewish immigration to the Europe in the early 20th century, and Eve's migrations from Poland to the US, to France, and her visits to Berlin, London, and Stockholm make her an international heroine. Eve's history is Polish history, US history, French history, and unfortunately, German history. 4, Eve's life is embedded in modern Jewish history, and her mode of death situates her in the history of anti-Semitism and the whole.
I'm sorry, folks. I'm not sure what happened. Seems that Jonathan is frozen. Let's wait this out a second. Hopefully he'll be back. Jonathan, you're muted.
Oh, okay, sorry. Eve's surveillance by Bureau of Investigation agents, the forerunner of the FBI agents, and the repressive collusion of federal, state, and city officials, a judge, and local police officers make her story relevant to the history of population tracking and repressive government responses to social justice movements. And there's a long history of that kind of surveillance repression. And 7, and lastly, the rise of fascism in Eve's time has eerie resemblances to our own time, and her story can serve as an early warning signal. On the last page of Eve's biography, I imagine seeing Eve way off in the distance, waving our arms frantically, trying to get our attention. I hear her shouting something, but I can't quite hear. Then I do hear. I hear Eve shouting, "Don't mourn, organize." Thanks. And that is my talk. And I'd love to hear what the audience members have to say. I think we have a few enough people that people can mute themselves and join in. We can just join in a conversation. I see there's Miriam Frank out there who has written a fabulous book about working class LGBT history. And Michelle Griffo, did I pronounce your name right? Yes, I hope so. And Tony Phillips. Anyway, so can we have a conversation?
Absolutely, please.
Michelle, do you?
It's Michaela.
I'm sorry.
I just want to tell you, thanks to the pandemic and all this time, I finally had a chance to read your entire history of the gay. It's wonderful. I loved every single story.
In the which one? Which of the books? The Eve book. You mean the Eve? You mean the Eve?
No, your book, your history, your book, A Gay History.
Oh, Gay American History.
Yes. Yeah. Oh my God, it is just fabulous. I mean, wow. Being one of the original members of the Gay Liberation Front, you know, I feel, I mean, this is just my feeling, is that some of these younger people who go around, you know, I'm queer, I'm this, I'm that, all this, you know, they have no idea what life was like. what it was. I mean, when I think of the word queer, I tell these people, it was the last thing I heard before a police baton came down cracking my skull, or we were chained to the city hall fence, that kind of thing. So when you write a book like that goes, I mean, way back, and even the one you've written now about this woman, this is why I love you, because you really, I love the people who are recording our history, because so much of our history, like even you and I remember when you came to the New York Historical Society when I spoke there in 2019, and there was an exhibit at the museum, the Brooklyn Museum, that said that it was Stormy who was the woman who started Stonewall, whatever. And we all knew it was Marilyn Fowler. We knew Marilyn Fowler. We knew she was the crazy lesbian that started the whole thing. So it's things like that never, it's wonderful that someone such as yourself has recorded the history, not just of, going way back, but continues to record history of people who may have gotten lost.
Yes, I hope that you have done lots of oral history interviews about GLF and about your experience before that. And I hope that that's true, because I'm always urging, since I first started talking to people about going out and talking in the early, well, after Gay American History was published in 1976, I would go on the publisher sent me out, and I would say to people, make carbons of your love letters. That shows how carbons, they wouldn't even know what a carbon is today. People.
It's an element.
So, but it's true. I still feel the same way, that it's so important for us to document our lives and take our lives seriously as historic, where all of our lives, for everyone's life has something in it that should be preserved. Everyone should have a memoir, everyone in the world, so
I don't have a memoir, but I do have my artwork.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Miriam,
that's a memoir of sorts.
Yes. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Miriam has her hand up.
There's a piece of what you are writing about the Jewish persecution, about how this hatred of a lesbian is also the hatred of Jews. And there's been a lot of literature about, not enough, but enough that is really quite great, of what happened in the concentration camps among queer people. And I think I'm forgetting the name of the play, but you know the one that I'm talking about.
Oh yes, the Broadway play by the English writer. I forget the name of it.
Bent.
Yeah.
What was it?
Bent. Yeah.
B-E-N-T. Bent.
Bent. Yes, Bent. And it was a great play. It was a tragic play, and I saw it once. I think it was a student production, and I told a friend of mine, and she said, "Well, and it was a guy. He was a medical doctor. He was a gynecologist, and he said, my grandfather was in the concentration camp, and he had a love affair with another man in the camp, and they were punished. They did not survive, and he wasn't able to track that particular path.
Yeah.
But it was so important for him to know, first of all, to know that someone had felt like this long before he had felt like this.
Yes.
And it made me say, oh my goodness, there's so much more. And
yes.
At the time I was studying, I have my PhD in German literature. So yeah, that's something you don't know. No. But that was my PhD. I grew up speaking German. My parents were refugees from Nazi Germany.
Yeah.
And when I started telling my mother and my aunt and my Uncle Fritz that I was really interested in what was going on, not in the concentration camps, but just the Berlin world of sex and glamour and coolness and weirdness. They were so happy that I was doing this kind of work. I thought, if I'm telling you I'm doing this, I'm basically coming out to you kids, you know. But they already knew.
Yeah, yeah.
And
You know, you bring up the subject of a lesbian Eve and Hella being sent to Auschwitz, and it's true that not too much lesbianism was not illegal under the laws in Germany. Gay male sex was. So not as much, therefore, is known about how lesbians fared under the Nazis, but historians are beginning to quite recently research this subject. And this has come up in our other discussions that I've had about Eve's story. People want to know about, was she sent to Auschwitz because she was a lesbian? No, she was sent to Auschwitz. She was arrested in France because she was Jewish, no doubt about it. But I say in the book that she fell into the paws of the Nazi animals because she was a lesbian who dared to speak up in the US, and therefore that was used against her. And it's the reason she ultimately ended up in France and was arrested. So I think it shows the confluence of different reasons that a lesbian like Eve might end up, being sent to Auschwitz.
Well, one of the things I know is that the common thing, the cliche thing, is about that the queer people were the ones who wore the pink triangle. Yeah. Well, those were the queer men. Mm-hmm. Those were the queer men, and there were lesbians who were having sex with each other and trying to take care of each other as couples. They weren't necessarily people that they'd known on the outside, but they developed relationships. They were considered asocial, asozial. Mm-hmm. They did not wear a pink triangle. Yeah. They wore an upside down black triangle. Mm. And that had to do with being mentally ill. It had to do with any kind of sexual perversion. And of course, lesbian sex was a perversion. They also were for crazy people, and so that the pink triangle was so demarcating of men. Yeah. But the Nazis did not really care as much about the sexuality of lesbian women, because lesbian women could be raped and then they would become women by giving birth. Yes, they were concerned about the population and just increasing of little Nazis. They wanted to make. Well, that was outside in the regular Nazi world. Yeah, but also in the camps. Yeah, they were not just because they were lesbians, but also because they were against society. Yes, yes. Against normal society. Here is the book. If you hadn't seen the cover of it, Eve's picture is right in the middle there, and it's a 1941 passport photo that she had taken with the hope that she would be able to be allowed back into the United States. It was a forlorn hope completely, but it shows her having this fantasy that they would somehow let her back in, was a expression of her strong desire to get out of harm's way in Nazi occupied France. So it's not at all her friend Ben Reitman, who
describe it as pathetic, or this attempt, this thought, that this fantasy she was having as of getting back into the United States because she asked him for help. But I really object to that understanding of it. I think it expresses a very strong desire of her to get out of harm's way, possible harm's way. I also want to stress the role that, collective role that research on Eve Adams played in my being able to write this book. For instance, my meeting up with Aaron Zahavi in Israel through Zoom conferences allowed me, he had a file of materials that he had collected. His grandfather was Eve's brother, and his grandfather tasked him with finding out what happened to Eve in World War II, during World War II. The grandfather, Eve's brother, never knew what happened. So Aaron grew up since he was a little boy wanting to know about Eve, what happened to Eve. And he has been a wonderful, supportive help. This is a very different experience for a researcher than the old days when families, when they found out a relative was a lesbian, they burned their papers rather than gave them to the historian. So I also experienced that with Daniel Olstein in Switzerland. I just heard from him today, and he was thanking me for a copy of the book. And another, presumably straight family member who had this valuable file of documents in the closet that they brought out and were shared willingly and graciously shared, generously shared with me. I also want to mention Barbara Kahn, a playwright who did several plays about Eve Adams, and they were put on at the Theater for the New City, where Barbara has worked for years. And Barbara, after I convinced her that I was on the up and up as a historian, I was going to treat her with respect. Barbara was extremely generous with her research that she had done, and she had done a lot for her plays. She does plays based on research. And she had also worked with a now deceased gay male archivist and librarian, and he was very good at research, and they had found some very, very important documents that present us with Eve's voice. I was thrilled to discover that there were a number of documents in which Eve speaks, and I begin the biography with one of those documents, which was Eve's deportation hearing testimony. Thank God that the US government, some law said that they had to record the testimony of people that they were going to try to deport. So there is Eve's own testimony in her defense, in her self-defense. So let's see, is there anything else? Yeah.
Jonathan, I wanted to ask, how did you first learn of Eve Adams?
Oh, good question. I was reading a review on December 1st in the New York Times, December 1st, 2016, of a book about women that had been significant in some fashion in New York City history. And it mentioned a Polish lesbian who got in trouble with, made a homosexual advance to a policewoman. I said, what? I don't remember a thing about this. And I, as a person who studied LGBT history for 50 years, I was surprised, and I started to investigate and saw that there was lots of stuff because of Barbara's plays. There started to be more and more stuff on the internet about Eve Adams. And then I started to try to distinguish what were internet facts and what were real facts. Alternate facts versus facts with evidence behind them. That's something I really want to stress. In this world in which anybody can say anything on the internet without the faintest true, evidence behind it. It was very important to me to try to quote from the evidence and then clearly evaluate, present my interpretations as interpretations so that other people could weigh what they thought about, these interpretations of what the evidence was saying, because evidence, really doesn't speak for itself. It needs to be interpreted, but it's the starting point of good history. So, so that was a big part of what I was interested in doing in the Eve Adams biography is, getting us away from all these, a lot of stuff on the internet just isn't true. There are some pictures that claim to be Eve and they're not Eve. They don't look anything like Eve. And it's time I hope they're taken down. It really, as a historian who cares about trying to get at the truth, the Trump era and the internet have been very distressing for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
So,
it makes things both accessible, but also a proliferation of everything.
It's a technology that allowed me to speak to somebody in Israel and for us to have a conversation together with the person in Switzerland, and for me to, anyway, it's an interesting research process for the ebook. I barely left my chair. I barely went to a library. I wrote to libraries via the internet and email, but in the old days, I would have been having to traipse off to the archive. And I do have a wonderful researcher friend, Channing Joseph, who says, you should go to that library. You're going to find things that the librarians didn't know about. And I'm sure it's true. And I'm hoping that the publication of my biography of Eve will lead to new evidence about her life being discovered. And it has already begun to happen. The New York City LGBT Sites Project just the other day found found photographs, 2 photographs of the building in which Eve lived at 38 Washington Square West in 1925, at the time she was, in 1926 when she was arrested. So I had tried to find where this was exactly, and they were able to find it because they got interested in doing this research because of the biography. So I'm hoping that more of this will be happening. I would love to, every little bit of new information is really valuable because there are big gaps in what we know about Eve, even though there's some wonderful documentation of letters that she wrote. There are about 7 pieces of correspondence that Eve wrote to Ben Reitman that are in an archive in Chicago, because he lived in Chicago and he saved these things. But I think if I could go to Chicago and sit in that library for a month maybe, and go every single day, I have a feeling there's even more material of Eve's in that archive than the library was able to tell me about, and that other researchers had been able to find. There's a couple of pictures, of photographs that Eve sent to Reitman that haven't shown up in his archive. And I think they're there someplace and just they're lost in a huge amount of material that needs to be looked through again by somebody that's looking for Eve material in particular. Anybody else who hasn't spoke before? Anybody else? Okay, Miriam again.
Well,
yes.
I don't want to lose this thought.
Yes.
First of all, Claudia Schoppmann, a German historian of lesbian life and history, and a very, very thorough German scholar.
Yes.
of lesbian life and history during the Third Reich.
Yeah.
I mean, her book is really is a tome. I couldn't get through it, and I read it. I read it, some of it in German and some of it in English. It was a lot of stuff. But she gloriously created a small book, Die Zeit der Maskierung, The Days of Masquerade, and it was translated into English. It had a life of about 6 or 7 years, went out of print, and it's about lesbian lovers during the Third Reich.
In
Those-
Germany. In
Yeah,
Germany.
yeah, in Germany, and some of it is about successful affairs. Some of it is about hiding in the woods. It's written in a very simple. It's in a simple German, and it got translated into a simple English. As I said, it's out of print, but it's a beautiful book, and not so much that it's not Eve's book, but to know that there were other lovers,
Yes.
who were being saved or who were being wrecked or who suffered or who dressed for the duration of the Third Reich as men. There's a whole world of beyond Eve, beyond the cafe and all of that stuff. That's a great opening, and I want to see that book coming back into print.
Okay, I think that I wrote to her and sent her a copy of the biography of Eve. I will check it out, though. I made a note of. Thank you for telling me about that. That's
she doesn't know me well, but I think she might remember my name.
Okay, I will. Okay.
And the other thing, let me see, there was another piece of it that I wanted to say before I lost it. Yeah, Days of Masquerade.
Okay.
And the other person who would know a lot, or maybe some, and it's someone who was the lover of a lover, is that Ben Wright. Is it Ben?
Reitman.
Yes. He was the lover of Emma Gold. No.
Yes,
Emma
right.
Goldman.
Yes.
Goldman. And Candace Falk in Berkeley, California, has been working on the papers and the lives and the loves and biography. And I mean, she's been working on Emma Goldman since she finished her PhD, and now she's my age. So
who is that? Who is that?
Her name is Candace
Falk. Oh, yes. She published a major biography. I've been in touch with her. I'm in touch with her, and she's been wonderfully generous also with help.
She is wonderful. So
yeah, she is. Yes. Yes.
And I'm going to write to her that I attended this event.
Good. Yes, yeah.
And I want to thank you, Jonathan, for bringing up the whole idea of how many letters of lesbians' lives have been destroyed, so that we'll never really fully know. Like, I would love to read the letters between Lenore Hickok and Eleanor Roosevelt. We'll never know, what went on there. I'm doing a whole series of portraits, drawings of, it's called Somebody Killed Me, but one of them is Emily Dickinson, because I was brought up to believe she's she lives closeted in her room. She was the spinster. She had a wonderful love affair with her sister-in-law, Sue. When she died, her brother, who was married to Sue, erased Sue's name from every single one of their love letters. So everybody assumed it was some man she was pining after. Yes. So thank you for bringing that up. It's so important. So much of our history has either been completely destroyed on the internet by people who weren't there and didn't know what was going on, or just in general that so many documents were destroyed because people were gay or lesbian.
Yes. There's evidence of some of the letters between Eleanor Roosevelt and Lorena Hickok being destroyed. So considering what's left, God knows what was in the ones that were destroyed, because the ones that there's some pretty hot stuff in some of the ones that
right, Eleanor, she's really
Did you like that?
Yeah, I was when I was sent out to do interviews after Gay American History was published in 1976. I was interviewed by a woman reporter in Washington, D.C., I believe, and she was very upset when I suggested that Eleanor Roosevelt had a lesbian relationship with Lorena Hickok. And she thought, well, what's the evidence? I said, well, I don't know if she would have called herself a lesbian, but she slept with a lesbian. Lesbian. They wrote love letters to a lesbian. So, so anyway, I remember that very well. She was really mad at me for saying, obviously, Eleanor Roosevelt was a hero of hers as an early pioneering, assertive woman. And here I was saying she was a lesbian, and she couldn't deal with it right away. I hope she, since has dealt with it.
Oh my God.
Anyway, we've talked quite a while. Any
I could listen to you all night long.
Oh, okay.
Tons of information.
It's nearly 7. I've enjoyed being here. It's great to get the word out. Tell your friends about the Eve Adams biography. I'm very excited about it. Finally, after 4 years of work, it takes that long, or 5 years even, to get a book published. So it's very exciting to get the word out to the public about this fascinating woman. I really say to people, I've given you an overview of her life, but the interest of her story is in the little details that what the FBI agents say, what the prejudiced man says, who is giving the talks about Americanism. It's in these little details. You can't make up this stuff, this amazing stuff that's in the details. So I urge you to read the book and have fun with it and enjoy it. And I guess that will be it.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. I look forward to reading this. It's amazing to me how many lives J. Edgar Hoover touched. For lack of a better word.
My own included. Turned out I have an FBI file because I write about this in the epilogue to the Eve Adams book. I say that I attended a very subversive thing, a meeting at Antioch College of the Socialist Discussion Club. That was my subversive activity.
It doesn't take much.
Doesn't take much. I was trying to recruit people to collect the names of people who are going to a socialist discussion club meeting. What about, due process, freedom of speech, forget it. Anyway, so I'm honored to be.
There's a badge of honor to have an FBI file.
Thank you, Mr. Hoover.
I don't want to stick to the New York phone book. So.
I've joked and said, oh, thank you, all those agents that were writing down, what Eve was saying, because it presents us with more documentation.
They're historians.
It's not a negative aspect to it. They were out to get her and get her out of the country. So, like much of history, it's very contradictory. They provided the documentation of her life and they resulted in her death, both things.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you so much for all the books you've written and just all the work you've done on LGBT history. It's just so important. And especially for this new book, sounds fascinating. I can't wait to read it. And I can't wait to see you again in person.
Oh, yes, that would be lovely. I want the center to be open.
Yes, well, anyone who has any pull, do what you can. Okay. Hopefully in July.
Okay, maybe before.
Yes. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Again, thanks to all who donated and who purchased the book. I hope we'll see you soon. We do have another LGBTQ history event on Sunday with Don Kilhefner, who's an activist in LA, one of the people who established the center there and founder of Gay Liberation Front in LA. So, Michaela, I'm guessing you may know the name. But yeah, I'm looking forward to that as well. So please visit us then.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks for a great evening. We should all get together again next Saturday.
Yes.
Right. So thank you so much, Greg.
Good night.
Thanks,
Good night,
Greg.
everybody.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Have a good evening.
You too.
Bye.